Hi there, and welcome to Customize Every Sweater. I'm Megan Nodecker, and I've been a knitwear designer for over 15 years. I'm really passionate about teaching knitters how they can modify and make alterations, especially to garment patterns, so that they can create something that fits and feels exactly right. I really want knitters to, when they're done knitting, feel really good about what they've made and, make it a piece of their everyday wardrobe and not just something that they had fun creating. I am myself a product knitter, so I really want that end piece to be exactly how I want it to be, and that's what I love teaching. So today in this class, we're going to be going over all sorts of different ways that you can customize any sweater pattern. We're going to be talking about some more simple edits like edging and colors, just more drastic changes like changing your yarn or using a different gauge, and a little bit of everything in between. So, in my experience, I feel like some knitters believe that they have to stick to the pattern in order for it to turn out right. But I believe that the best thing about making your own clothing, especially your own garments, your own wearables, is that you really get to decide how you want it to look and feel. So I'm here today to give you some inspiration of maybe some different things you can try on your next garment and to maybe give you a little boost of confidence to try something a little bit more out of your comfort zone. So let's dive in. So, the first thing I want to suggest, if you want to get into really modifying and customizing your knits a little bit more, is to grab a stitch dictionary. And that is something that looks like this. This is Barbara Walker. She has lots of knitting books, she has lots of stitch dictionaries. I have a couple of them that I've picked up at secondhand stores or used bookstores, and these are just a wealth of knowledge and information, and they contain a really good mix of all sorts of different things. I have a collection of many. I collect stitch dictionaries. So this is just one of them. But inside, you'll usually find different categories. So this section's all about twisted stitches. This is about some cables, all sorts of different things, lace, so that you can get some inspiration for different things. I think there's even a section in here about different edgings, which will come in handy when we talk about different edgings that you can use. But something like this is a really good resource just to flip through, to get ideas, to learn about different stitch patterns. There's easy patterns, there's hard patterns, there's color work, there's texture, there's lace, there's cables, there's everything in one of these. Um, Another one I have is this one. So I mean, you don't have to go out and get the exact one I have. Like I said, I go to a lot of used bookstores and usually just pick up the ones that I find there. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is probably the easiest thing that you can do to change the look of your sweater, and that's by changing the edging. So, this is your cuffs, your collars, your necklines, and going a little bit against what the designer has said or suggested. I like to think of designers' patterns as suggestions. Um, so, going kind of against what they've said and really going with what you want to do instead. So, edgings can be anything from 2 by 2 rib, 1 by 1 rib, twisted rib. Those three can all be kind of interchanged quite easily. There's also things that create a more polished and sleek look, like I-cord edges or folded hems. And then you have things like more decorative edges, which you can do with lace or broken ribs or cables. There's so many different things that you can try. And generally, because it's just this one little bit, it is a very small change that can have quite a big impact on your finished item. So I have a couple of examples that I want to show you of different edgings and kind of how they change the look. So this is a little crop t-shirt and it has twisted rib on the cuffs and the hem. It doesn't have any edging along the top because it wasn't designed with any, so I didn't put any. Now, I have the same basic shirt, but instead of twisted rib on the arms, I did an I-cord bind off. And you can see how that does just add a little bit more polish to the finished sweater and kind of a completely different look. This one is more like a cute little cap sleeve. When it's on, it kind of comes over and goes down a little bit. This one is more like a tank top almost and just has that neat little edge there. A folded hem like this can easily be accomplished by going down a couple of needle sizes. Usually, you go down one or two needle sizes when you do ribbing or any sort of other edging. For a folded hem, you usually want to go down one more than that. You want this to be tighter, and you just knit it double and then fold it over and hem it. And this gives a really, really clean line. It does take a little bit more effort and a little bit more time, but it does produce a really clean finish. And then we have something like this, which is a broken rib. And there you can see it's not quite a rib. It doesn't pull in as much. This one, instead of doing knit two, purl two the whole way, you do one row of knit one or knit two, purl two, and then one row of knitting. And that creates a rib like structure that doesn't roll and doesn't fold, but it also doesn't pull in at all. So this is an A-line sweater that I've used on this on, and I didn't want it to come in at the waist at all, so I've done a broken rib instead. And then as a decorative edge, you could do something like this, where it's a lace edge with no ribbing or anything else. So that's a very decorative edging. And that way you can have a really simple garment, but you can upgrade it by just adding that little bit extra there. The next kind of easy change that you can make is about colors. So you do not have to use the same color that the pattern has or the designer has designed the pattern in. I know sometimes I do this too, where you just really love what they've done, and so you want to use the same color. You don't have to. You can get creative with your colors and do something totally different, and it's going to be gorgeous. You can also add colors. So you can pretty well stripe anything. You can add stripes to anything. And this is also a really great way if you might not have enough yarn in one single color to stretch that yarn out a bit. So you can do striping to make sure that you do have enough yarn. You can also color block. So you could do the sleeves of one color and the body of another, or you can do different colors on the hems and the collars and things like that. You can really get creative with just straight up switching colors. You could also do something like a fade, which is very fun, where your colors kind of melt into each other. Now, when you're thinking about changing colors or doing multiple colors or taking a striped pattern and doing it in a single color, the only thing you really have to think about is your yardage. So, of course, you'll have less yardage per color if you're using more colors, and you'll need more yarn if you're going from a stripe to a single color. So, you just want to think a little bit about how that can affect your end product. Another neat thing that you can do with color is if you're working on a color work sweater of some sort, you can change the motif if you want to. You can take something like this guy. This is a mosaic color work sweater. So it has a three color kind of mosaic striping pattern on the body. And you can swap that out for something completely different. I have a couple different options that I was thinking of for this sweater. I have some more Fair Isle kind of classic motifs. I had some stripes that I was thinking about. I have a couple little more designs. And I have even one more swatch, and I have even one more swatch. This is what I ended up with, of course. If you couldn't tell, if you are going to do something like this, where you are changing the type of color work, this is going from mosaic to a stranded color work, you do want to make sure that you are swatching. I'll talk a little bit more about this later about what to do if your gauge doesn't match the patterns, but you want to make sure that you have a nice big swatch of the fabric that you're actually going to use. And if you're changing the color work, if you're going even from color work that's like this to color work that's like this, your gauge can change. So you want to make sure that you swatch so that you know what those changes are going to be. Another thing that you can do is you can completely change the style or texture of your fabric. So if you have a plain stockinette base sweater, you can make it into a textured fabric using knit and purl stitches. You can make it into a lace stitch pattern instead or cables. You can use your handy dandy stitch dictionary to find something that you like and swap it out. Again, I'm going to say this lots and lots because it's very important. But you do want to make sure that you swatch and make it a nice big swatch so that you know what the difference in gauge is going to be. And I'll tell you how to deal with that in a minute. You can change the texture all over. So if you want to change it from stockinette to a lace over the whole thing, that's great. You can also just add panels of interest. So if you're doing a panel, I want to show you something that can happen and something to keep in mind. Because when you are working with stockinette stitch, if your base is stockinette stitch and you want to add a panel of cable stitches, cables pull in. So that means that you're creating a fabric with a tighter gauge. And if you don't do any adjustments, your item is going to turn out much smaller than you anticipated. On the flip side, if you are doing a panel of lace or textured stitches, like knit purl texture, that will create a looser gauge. So your item is going to turn out larger than what you thought. So you really have to watch out for what is happening with those changes. If I can show you an example. This is a 24 stitch cable panel from here to here is 24 stitches. When I measured that from here to here, laid out flat, it was about 4.5 inches. Now, if I counted out 24 stitches of stockinette stitch, which is about this much, that turned out to be 5.5 inches. So the gauge difference between the plain stockinette and this cable panel was quite different. So you do have to determine whether you need to add some extra stitches when you're casting on or take away some stitches when you're casting on to make it even. You want to make sure that your finished measurement is going to be the same. So in this case, in something like this, what you would need to do is actually add extra stitches. So if I have my stockinette stitches 5.5 inches here for 24 stitches, and 24 stitches here is 4.5 inches, I have to add another whole inch of fabric. So however many stitches that is over 1 inch, I'm going to have to cast on that many extra stitches to make sure that my overall circumference is going to be correct. Make sense? Another modification that you can make is you can change the shapes of an item to suit your preferences. So you can add, extend, or remove sleeves. You can add or remove length to the body. You can even add in shaping or change the shaping of a sleeve. So I have another example here. Of two very similar sweaters with quite different shapes. So this one, which I showed before, this has the lace edging on the bottom, and it is a very cropped little t-shirt. And it actually comes in at the waist. So if you can see, it's a little bit wider at the top and then gets narrower down at the waist. And this is the sister sweater to that. And it is the same basic shape up top, but it is a straight body and it is quite a bit longer and it was made with more positive ease. So the fit of these two sweaters, even though they have the same lace detail at the bottom, even though this one's a little bit longer, they have the same shaping at the neck, they're knit with the same yarn, they have the same sleeves. If I was to put this one on and put this one on, they would be two totally different tees because of the shaping in them. And one more thing that you can do is you can use different yarn. You don't have to use the yarn that's recommended in the pattern. You can swap it out for something you already have in your stash or something that's more accessible to you. One of the main things to keep in mind when you are changing yarns is to think about the fiber content and what different fiber contents do and how that will affect your final piece. So, rustic wools, they are quite fibrous. They generally stick together. That's their kind of whole purpose. They're very sturdy. They don't have a lot of drape, but they have a ton of memory. When you compare that to something like superwash, which has been treated to smooth out those fibers, you're going to get a much silkier, drapier, heavier fabric. Luxury fibers like silk and cashmere, they don't have a lot of bounce and they will add a lot of drape to your garment. So you'll probably find that your stitches are a little skinnier and maybe a little longer. Um, if you were modifying something from a rustic yarn. And then cotton and linen also kind of do their own things. Um, Cotton can shrink up as it's washed, it can widen out and shrink. Linen stretches and then it does not stretch back. So there's no memory in linen. So if you're doing that kind of swap, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be scared of it. But you do have to keep some of those properties in mind and know how to deal with them if problems arise, like you can't match gauge. The reason why I've been talking about swatching and gauge so much is because that is really important to get the finished size that you need. So if you are switching fiber contents, you do want to make sure that you swatch. Again, you want to make sure that you swatch so that you can compare how your fabric acts compared to how the designer pictures look or what they've said about the fabric of that particular sweater. So you can plan according. If you see a very structured, coat like sweater and you knit it in a something with a lot more drape, it's going to have a different look. Doesn't mean that it's wrong or that it's bad or anything like that. It just means that you are now taking control of what your sweater is going to look like by choosing a different fiber. One more thing you can do with yarn is you can actually switch yarn weights. And switching yarn weights kind of up or down one level is quite easy. Um, you do just have to swatch and maybe do a little bit of math, which I know I've been talking a lot about swatching and I've been talking a lot about gauge. And the thing is, you don't necessarily have to match the pattern's gauge to do some of these things. So I'm going to teach you what to do when your gauge doesn't match the patterns. Hey, so Future Megan here. I just wanted to pop in before I start telling you about these gauge changes. I wanted to let you know about a resource that we have that goes over all of this information with you. It's kind of complementary to exactly what I'm going to be talking about in the next couple minutes. It contains the gauge changes worksheet. So I'm going to be talking about some math and some numbers. This is just a simple worksheet that will keep track of all that for you. It also includes step-by-step instructions, so you don't have to watch this video over and over again. It just is the worksheet with all of the instructions right there. And then it also has the gauge changes calculator. And this is a special spreadsheet that I created so that you don't have to do any of this math if you don't want to. You can just punch in certain numbers from your gauge and the pattern that you're working on, and it will do all of these calculations for you. So you can just get right to knitting. I've put a link down below in the description. You can get it right through there, and I hope you find it valuable. All right, so the first step is to swatch, and you want to make a nice big swatch, at least 6 inches by 6 inches. This is going to give you a good bit of information so that you make the correct size. This is especially important when we're changing things because it's unlikely that if you change a stockinette fabric into a lace fabric, your gauge is not going to match the pattern designer's gauge. If you want to knit your sweater in a fingering weight yarn, but it was written for sport weight yarn, Your gauge is probably not going to match the designer's gauge. And the reason why gauge is so important is because that's what designers use to determine how many stitches um, to cast on or at different parts of the body and how big the finished garment is going to be. So if your gauge is different than the designer's gauge, then your sweater is going to turn out larger or smaller than what's listed in the pattern. And that's okay, but we need to have a way where we can accurately determine what those finished measurements are going to be based on your gauge. So how we do that, again, we're gonna make a nice big swatch. We're gonna wash it the same way that we're gonna wash our sweater. So whether that's wet blocking it or putting it in the washer and dryer, whatever, however you're gonna wash your finished sweater, that's how you're gonna treat your swatch. I also like to suggest to let it relax a little bit. So some people, if they lay it out flat and they dry it and then they measure, that's not really how the fabric is going to react in everyday life. We're gonna put these on our bodies, we're gonna wear them, they're gonna move. They're not static. So what I like to do is take my swatch after it's been dry and scrunch it up in my fingers and put it in my purse for maybe a day or two, leave it on my coffee table and let people play with it because that's what a sweater is going to do. It's going to move with us, right? So we want it to relax. We want the fibers to do what they're naturally going to do. That's going to give us a more accurate measurement. We're going to measure over the 4 inches in the middle of your swatch. And then we're going to divide that by 4 to find how many stitches we have in 1 inch. So in my example, I have a swatch and I've measured the 4 inches in the middle and I get 20 stitches. I'm going to divide that by 4. And so now I know I have 5 stitches per inch. The next step is to decide what you want the finished circumference of your sweater to be. So knitting patterns are generally sized around the bust or chest area. So you want to take your measurement here and add or minus any ease that you want in your sweater. So my bust is 44 inches and I want my sweater to be a little bit relaxed fitting. So I want 4 inches of positive ease. So 44 plus 4 is 48 inches. I want my sweater to be 48 inches in circumference when it's complete. The next step is to multiply that number, 48, by our stitches per inch. So 48 times 5 equals 240. So that means I want 240 stitches at my bust because 240 stitches at my gauge is going to give me the 48-inch bust that I want. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go into the pattern that we are creating and we want to find somewhere in that pattern, and this will vary depending on the construction of the sweater and whether it's top down or bottom up. So we want to find the stitch counts for the bust. So wherever that is in the pattern, what is this stitch count? And it should be in the pattern somewhere. We want to find the two that are closest to that number. So maybe one above and one below, and then we'll kind of look at just those two sizes. So if I go into this pattern that I want to make, I see that there is a size that has 220 stitches at the bust and a size that has 248 stitches at the bust. I'm going to take those numbers and divide it by my stitch gauge. So my stitches per inch. So 220 divided by 5 is 44. So that size is going to give me a finished measurement of 44 inches. The 248 stitch size divided by 5 is going to give me a finished bust measurement of 49.6 inches. So then I just have to decide if I want a 44-inch finished circumference, so my sweater will just be fitted to my body, or whether I want a 49.6-inch finished circumference, which is a little bit more than I had originally intended. Um, but still kind of within that same limit. So me personally, I'd go with the bigger size, but that's the great thing is you get to decide which one you want to do instead. You can also use this calculation once you've kind of found that bust measurement. In my imaginary pattern here, I'm going to be making a size extra large. So I can go and now look at the size extra large and find different stitch counts and find different measurements and see if that's going to work for me before I really decide that's the size that I want to do. Me again. I just wanted to remind you that I do have a resource bundle available. It contains the gauge changes worksheet, all the instructions that I talked about step by step, so you can just follow along with that sheet, as well as the gauge changes calculator. So, again, all that is in the description below. And that's it. So those are some simple and some not so simple ways that you can really customize and modify your sweaters to personalize them to you to make them fit your body exactly how you want them to and be in the style that you want them to be in as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned a lot and I will see you next time. Bye.